Hello, National University Academy students, National University Virtual High School students, and any CSET students who are looking to review for your examinations. I'm going to be going over some information for chapters 8 and 9 in your America Past and Present textbooks, reviewing for the quiz you'll see in Unit 4, which will precede the midterm. So let's go over a few things that you'll see in Chapter 8 to begin with. The anecdote related at the beginning of Chapter 8, you'll notice wherein Jansen confronts a maid who is having no intention of being relegated to low social status, illustrates a paradox at this time. While the South was a slave-holding region, it was also a region that was very bold in its understanding of being free. And it was obvious to contemporaries and British visitors who expressed contempt for this that while African Americans were 1/5 of the population and they were enslaved, that at the same time Jefferson Republicanism was an expression of freedom on one hand and a bold continuation of slavery on the other. And I think there's this interesting quote that one of them said, "How is it that we hear," and this is from Samuel Johnson, "how is it that we hear the loudest yelps of liberty from the drivers of the Negroes?" This idea that how is it that these slaveholders are the ones always talking about how they want their freedom. And we talked about this again in the chapter with regard to the Barbary pirates, where the Americans, U.S. citizens, were talking about how we're being enslaved by the Barbary pirates. They're taking us away. Well, of course it had to do with this recognition that they said white people get to be free and black people can be slaves. It was this clear hypocrisy that, because of the mindset at the time, did not seem like a total conflict in basic logical thinking. The defeat of the Native Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers partly opened the way for new settlements beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Americans who crossed the Appalachians were ambitious and self-confident people, and you can review this information on 225. In commerce and politics, Americans perceived themselves as representatives of distinct subcultures at this time. It's not until the railroads and canals that would come some decades later that you started to break down these subcultures. In the 1820s, slowly America's becoming an industrial economy, but we're not. Those subcultures still exist, and you can review this on page 225 as well. Commercial innovation in the Jeffersonian period included introduction of agricultural fare, introduction of textile industry in New England, expansion of the merchant marine, and that was pretty much it. There's a question they try to trick you there with I try to trick you there with a question on the Erie Canal. That's going to come later on, and that's if you look on page 364. The 364-mile-long, 40-foot wide, 4 feet deep Erie Canal was able to reduce the cost of shipping from Buffalo to Albany, and was quite a project for its time, but it did not happen during the Jeffersonian period. That happened during James Monroe's term. The largest single group of people in American society during the Jeffersonian era was children under the age of 16, and this is on page 224. That's usually an indication of mores changing when you have such a large younger count of youth. In Iran right now, there's a lot of talk of there being a cultural shift because of the large number of young people that live in that country. As President, Thomas Jefferson maintained close ties with congressional leaders. You can review that on page 229. He was a master at working closely with his Congress. He didn't have to veto much of anything because he was always involved in the Congress. So when a bill did come up, it was something that he'd already kind of created and consent for in the Congress. So he didn't. There wasn't a lot of, oh, what's this surprise? I'm going to veto it. It was something he'd already worked with Congress on. The important precedent for judicial review in federal statutes was set in the Marbury v. Madison case, and you please review that on page 236. Although his son had died from taking part in a duel after calling Aaron Burr the most dangerous man who not ought to be trusted with the reins of government, it was Alexander Hamilton who accepted Burr's invitation and participated in the duel, saying it was a matter of personal honor. On July 11th, 1804, at Weehawken, New Jersey, he died as a result of Burr's gunshot. Review this on page 238 of your text. At this time, Aaron Burr he had been vice president, and he was running for the governorship in New York when Hamilton said he was not to be trusted with the reins of government, that he was a dangerous man. Actually, his words turn out to be prescient, appropriately cautious, because Aaron Burr goes on to plan a potentially dangerous expedition. You can review that on page 239. It was this audacious event to create a new country from the western states, and Jefferson tried to make him pay for this, but it's the Chief Justice Marshall doesn't end up really coming down heavy on Burr, although Burr does have to leave politics forever. Small groups of Native Americans, allegedly representing the interests of an entire tribe, sold off huge pieces of land, often for whiskey and trinkets. This is on page 226. Let's see, what did I skip? I missed something, did I? That was sugar. Andrew Jackson and his Tennessee militia crushed the Creek Nation at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Review that on page 226. And then France relied heavily on American transport, France relied heavily on American transport for its sugar. And remember that Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar. Jefferson was going through this step called peaceful coercion at the time, and he was trying to get the British and the French to allow him greater access to their ports. And at this time, Jefferson was called the Commissar of the nation's economy because he was trying to push really hard with these tariffs, and it was seen as if he was directing commerce too directly. That should have been left open to the states. Let's see. Americans favored war against Britain in 1812 because of British seizure of American ships and impressment of American sailors. You'll remember that impressment is when the British ships board the American ships and take some of the ship's mates and some of the ship's servicemen and claim them as part of the Royal Navy. America's hopes to conquer Canada were also part of it. The push for the War of 1812. British provocation of Indian attacks against Western settlers, and American hopes to oust the British from Canada. All those answers are correct, and you can look at that information on page 243 and 244. I will be pausing about halfway through here so I can separate this up into 10-minute presentations. As a result of Macon's Bill number 2, Macon's Bill number 2, M-A-C-O-N-S, Macon's Bill, Nathaniel Macon of North Carolina tried to reestablish trade with England and France. Napoleon offered, although never intended to keep a promise, to respect American neutrality. You can look at that on page 242. The Battle of New Orleans was militarily significant in that it prevented British occupation of the strategic city. They would have been reluctant to surrender. Should have never happened, the Battle of New Orleans, because at the time, and this happens in the Civil War and other wars at this time when you don't have the ability to get these. I'm going to stop here and come back to this point in a moment. So hold on there.